Welcome back, and thank you for being here tonight. In the next couple of hours, we're going to wander slowly through some of the strangest amusement parks the world has ever quietly forgotten. Places built for laughter that the years simply walked away from. There's nothing to do now, and nowhere to be. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. And if your eyes want to close, let them. You can drift off whenever you like. I'll keep the lights low and the story soft, and we'll travel gently from one silent fairground to the next. Chapter 1. The Wheel That Never Turned. We begin in a place you may already know, because it has become, over the years, the most famous abandoned fairground on Earth. But tonight we won't approach it the way most people do, in a rush of alarm. We'll approach it slowly, the way you might walk into a quiet room at the end of a long day. The town is called Pripyat. It sits in the north of Ukraine, close to the border with Belarus, on a soft bend of the river that gave the town its name. If you had visited in the early spring of 1986, you would not have found a sad place at all. You would have found one of the youngest, brightest, most hopeful towns in the entire Soviet Union. Pripyat had been built only a little while before, in the early 1970s, to house the people who worked at a brand new power station a few kilometres away. The plant was named after a nearby town, an older town called Chernobyl, but the workers and their families lived here, in Pripyat, in clean white apartment blocks arranged around wide avenues and squares. The average age of the people who lived here was around 26. It was a town of young couples, of new marriages, of babies in prams and children on bicycles. There were schools and a hospital, a cinema, a house of culture, swimming pools, sports halls, cafes with big glass windows. Roses were planted everywhere, thousands and thousands of rose bushes, so that in summer the streets smelled sweet. Picture it softly. The light of an April evening lying gold across the concrete. Laundry drying on balconies. The sound of a radio somewhere, and footsteps, and the small ordinary music of a town settling into night. This was a good place to live. People were proud of it. They believed they were building the future, and in many ways they were. And in the very centre of this hopeful town, near the main square, the workers had been putting the finishing touches on something special. A small amusement park. Nothing enormous, just the kind of modest, cheerful fairground a town gives itself as a treat. There were bumper cars, painted and waiting under a long pavilion roof. There was a swing carousel, the kind where the seats hang from chains and lift outward as it spins. There was a shooting gallery and a paratrooper ride, and at the heart of it all a Ferris wheel. The wheel was painted a bright sunny yellow. Its little gondolas hung in a neat circle, each one open to the air, each one waiting. It had been assembled and tested, and now it simply stood there, gleaming, ready for its first real day. That first day had a date. The park was due to open to the public on the 1st of May, for the great spring holiday, May Day, when the whole town would pour out into the streets to celebrate. There would have been music and balloons and ice cream. Children would have begged their parents for one more turn on the wheel, one more lift up above the rooftops to see the whole town spread out below, the river shining, the forest stretching away to the horizon. That day was coming. It was only a few days away. You can almost feel how close it was. But it never came. Not the way anyone planned. In the small hours of the 26th of April, at the power station a few kilometres away, something went wrong during a test of one of the reactors. We don't need to dwell on the technical details tonight, and we certainly don't need to dwell on anything frightening. It's enough to say that there was an accident, and that it was serious, and that it released material into the air that could not be seen or smelled or felt, but that meant the town could not stay a town any longer. For a little while, on that first day, most people in Pripyat did not know. It was a Saturday. The weather was warm and clear, one of the first really beautiful days of the year. People hung out their washing, children played outside, some folks went fishing by the river or worked in their gardens, or simply enjoyed the sunshine. Weddings were held that day. It looked, for those few hours, like an ordinary lovely spring Saturday in a happy young town. And here is where one of the strangest, quietest stories about the wheel comes from. Some people say that on that Saturday, or perhaps the morning after, the little amusement park was opened early, ahead of its grand May Day debut. The idea, the story goes, was to give the townspeople something cheerful to do, to keep spirits up and keep people calm while the situation was being understood. By this telling, a handful of children may have ridden the wheel and the bumper cars for an hour or two, in the last morning the town was ever whole. I want to be honest with you, because honesty is part of what makes a story restful rather than uneasy. We don't truly know if this happened. It's one of those tales that has grown up around the place, repeated so often that it feels like fact, but the records are unclear, and many who would know remember it differently. So hold it lightly. Perhaps a few children did ride the wheel that morning. Perhaps no one ever did. Either way, the wheel turned only a very little, if at all, and then it stopped, and it has never properly turned again, because the next day, the order came. The town would have to leave. The evacuation of Pripyat happened on the afternoon of the 27th of April. And here, gently, is the part that brings real comfort. It was done. The people were taken to safety. Buses came, more than 1,000 of them, a long quiet line of them rolling into town, and over the course of a few hours, nearly the whole population of close to 50,000 people boarded those buses and were carried away westward, out of harm's reach. They were told it would only be for a few days. They were told to bring only what they needed for a short time. Many locked their front doors and put the key in their pocket, certain they'd be back by the weekend. They did not come back. But they were safe. That is the thing to hold on to as you rest. The town was emptied so that the people would not be harmed by staying. Mothers and fathers, grandparents, the children who might have ridden the wheel, they all went on to live their lives elsewhere. In new towns, in Kiev and beyond, scattered but alive. The town was given up so that the people could go on. When you think of Pripyat, you don't have to think of an ending. You can think of a great careful leaving, a town lifting its people out of danger and sending them onward. And the wheel stayed. It has stayed now for the better part of 40 years. The town around it has slowly, softly turned green. This is the part that, strangely, brings a kind of peace. Nature did not hesitate. Once the people were gone, the forest that had always pressed against the edges of the town simply began to walk inward. Birch and poplar seedlings took root in the cracks of the pavement. Moss spread across the squares. Roots lifted the concrete gently, the way a sleeper shifts a blanket. The roses ran wild, and then were swallowed by taller, stronger green things. Today, much of Pripyat is more woodland than town. Trees grow inside the apartment blocks. Deer and elk and wild boar move through the streets. Birds nest in the cinema. It is, by some quiet measure, more alive now than it was before. Just alive in a different way. A way that doesn't need us. In the middle of all that green, the Ferris wheel still stands. The bright yellow has faded to a soft rusted gold, the colour of autumn leaves. The little gondolas hang where they always hung, tilting slightly, swaying now and then when the wind comes through the birches. Moss has crept up the great wheel's legs. The bumper cars sit under their pavilion, filled with leaves, their paint gone chalky and pale. The swing carousel droops, its chains tangled with vines. People do come to see it now. The area is watched over and managed, and visitors are brought through carefully, in small numbers with guides, the way you might be led through a cathedral or a memorial. They stand in front of the wheel and they go quiet. There's something about it that asks for quiet. A Ferris wheel is such a happy thing, a promise of lightness and height and a child's eye view of the world, and to see one standing perfectly still in a forest, never having carried the children it was built for, touches something gentle and sad and oddly tender in almost everyone who sees it. But here, as we settle in for the night, let's not leave it on sadness. let's leave it on stillness. The wheel is not suffering. It is simply resting, as everything here is resting. The town did its last and greatest job well. It carried its people to safety. And now it lies down under the trees and the moss and the slow-turning seasons, and it sleeps the way you are beginning to sleep. The wind moves a gondola, just slightly. A bird calls once, far off, and then is quiet. The forest breathes, and the wheel, gold and gentle against the grey sky, keeps its long and peaceful watch over a town that is, at last, completely at rest. And the seasons turn over it, soft and slow, the way they turn over all our quiet places tonight. In spring, the wild apple and cherry trees that have seeded themselves across the old squares come into blossom, and for a little while the whole green ruin is dusted with pink and white, petals drifting down onto the rusted gondolas. In summer the forest is deep and humming, and the wheel stands in dappled shade, its legs lost in tall grass and wildflowers. In autumn the birches turn gold all around it, until the wheel and the trees are nearly the same soft burnished colour, and you can hardly tell the rust from the falling leaves. And in winter the snow comes down, gentle and endless, and settles on every spar and gondola, and the wheel stands white and silent against a pale grey sky, while the forest sleeps under its blanket and not a sound moves anywhere in the whole quiet town. Round and round the year goes, blossom and green and gold and white, blossom and green and gold and white, and the wheel keeps its patient place through all of it, asking nothing, needing nothing, simply standing, simply resting, simply turning, very slightly, when the wind comes through. Let's rest here a moment too, before we move on. There's no hurry. We have all night, and many more quiet places to visit. Breathe in slowly. Breathe out, and when you're ready, we'll travel on, westward, to a green park on the edge of a great city, where another wheel turns slowly in the wind, all on its own. Chapter 2. The Park That Drifted Away. Our next park is one of the strangest of all, not because of any single dramatic event, but because of the slow, dreamlike way its whole story unfolded. It is a park that seems to have wandered off into a fairy tale and never quite found its way back. To find it, we travel to Berlin, the great capital of Germany, and to a wide green wood on the southeastern edge of the city, beside the slow brown river Spree. The wood is called the Planterwald. It's an old forest of oaks and beeches, the kind of forest that has stood beside the river for a very long time, where people have always come to walk on Sunday afternoons. And in the year 1969, in the heart of that forest, a new park opened its gates. You have to understand what Berlin was like then. The city was cut in two. After the Great War, Germany had been divided, and so had its capital, split between east and west by politics, and eventually by a wall. This park was on the eastern side, in the part of the city that belonged to East Germany, a country that called itself the German Democratic Republic. And in that whole country, this was the one and only permanent amusement park. There was nowhere else like it. So it mattered enormously to the people there. It was called at first the Kulturpark Planterwald, the culture park in the forest. Imagine the families arriving on a summer morning, mothers and fathers and children walking in from the tram stop, in through the trees, into a clearing full of colour and music. There was a grand Ferris wheel, big and white, lifting riders up above the treetops to look out over the river and the city beyond. There were carousels and a little railway that chugged around the grounds. There were rowing boats shaped like swans that you could paddle around a pond. There was the smell of roast almonds and fried dough, and the tinny bright sound of fairground organs, and the laughter of children, and the whole warm, ordinary happiness of a day out. For families in the East, where many things were scarce and grey and carefully controlled, this park was a rare pocket of pure delight. Generations grew up on that white Ferris wheel. People had their first dates there, their first kisses at the top of the wheel with the whole divided city laid out below. For 20 years the park did what it was built to do. It made people happy. Then, in 1989, the wall came down, Germany became one country again. And everything changed, including the little park in the forest. When the East and West joined together, the old state that had run the park was gone, and the park had to find a new way to survive in a new world. It was handed over to private owners, a family, and given a new name. From then on it was called Spree Park, after the river. The new owners had big dreams. They wanted to turn the gentle old culture park into a modern Western-style theme park, full of new rides and bright new themes. They built an English village, a little corner of mock Tudor houses. They added a water ride, a roller coaster, a great many new attractions. And, in one of the details that makes this park so strange to picture, they set out a collection of enormous dinosaurs, life-sized models of creatures from millions of years ago, standing among the trees as if the forest had grown backward into deep time. For a few years in the early 1990s it worked. Crowds came. On its best days well over 1 million people passed through in a single year. The white Ferris wheel turned and turned above the Planterwald, and the swan boats drifted on the pond, and the dinosaurs kept their silent watch, and all seemed well. But slowly, gently, the trouble crept in, the way trouble often does, so quietly you barely notice until it has settled in completely. The park had been built deep in a protected forest, and there was almost nowhere for visitors to park their cars. People found it hard to reach. The entrance fees went up, the crowds thinned. Debts began to gather, the way fallen leaves gather in the corners of a yard, a few at first, and then drifts of them. The owner tried new attractions and new ideas, but each one cost money the park didn't really have, and the visitors kept dwindling, and the debts kept rising. By the autumn of 2001, it was over. The gates closed, the rides stopped, and here the story takes the strangest turn of all, the turn that lifts Spree Park out of the ordinary and into something that feels almost like a fable. The owner, deep in debt and unwilling to let his park simply die, made an extraordinary decision. He would take the park with him. He arranged for several of the big rides to be packed up, dismantled, loaded into shipping containers, and sent across the ocean to Peru, in South America, where he hoped to open the whole park again, under a new sky, far from his troubles. 6 of the great attractions were crated up and shipped away. He moved his family to Lima, the capital of Peru, and tried to start over. But the new park in Peru never really took root either, and the debts followed him across the world. And then, in a chapter that I'll tell you only softly, because it's strange and a little sad rather than frightening, some of those shipped ride parts became tangled up in a serious crime. Hidden inside the great masts of one of the rides, when they were eventually shipped back toward Germany, the authorities discovered a large quantity of smuggled drugs. The owner was caught and brought to court and given a prison sentence. His grown son, who had been involved, was held far away in Peru for a long time, much longer than the father. It was a sorry, tangled end to a family that had once simply wanted to run a happy little fairground in the forest. I tell you this not to trouble you, but because it's part of why people find this place so haunting and so strange. A park that began as a gentle gift to the families of a divided city ended up scattered across 2 continents, wrapped in debt and crime and a father's desperate dreaming. It's the kind of story that feels too odd to be real, and yet it is. And meanwhile, back in the Planterwald in the forest beside the Spree, the park itself was left behind. Most of the rides were gone, shipped away or sold off. But not all of them. Some things were simply too big, or too broken, or too forgotten to move. And chief among them was the great white Ferris wheel. It could not be taken. So it stayed, and here is the detail that has made Spree Park famous among all the world's abandoned places. The detail that is somehow both eerie and strangely beautiful. The Ferris wheel was never switched off at the source. Its brakes were not fully locked. And so, for years, whenever the wind came up off the river and pushed against its great circle, the wheel began, very slowly, to turn. All on its own. with no one there. No riders, no operator, no music, just the wind in the forest and a giant white wheel revolving quietly above the empty trees, creaking softly as it went, around and around, going nowhere, carrying no one, turning simply because the wind asked it to. People who came to see it, and many did over the years, drawn by the strange magic of the place, said the sound of it was the thing they remembered most, that slow groan and creak of the wheel coming around in the dark, the gondolas swaying, the river sliding past below. It became one of the most photographed abandoned things in all of Europe. The wheel turning by itself. The fallen dinosaurs lying in the long grass, their painted skins peeling, vines climbing their legs. The swan boats drifting loose on the pond or piled up against the bank. A whole flock of grimy white swans tangled together and slowly filling with rainwater and leaves. The forest, of course, did what forests do. It came back in. Brambles swallowed the paths. Saplings pushed up through the cracked concrete of the old plazas. The English village faded and grew soft with moss. A fire came through one part of the grounds one year and left its dark marks. And through it all the wheel kept turning whenever the wind blew, patient and ghostly, and somehow companionable, like an old animal too gentle to leave. In time, the city of Berlin took the land back into public hands, and made plans, careful and slow, to bring the forest park back to life in a new and quieter way. Not as a roaring theme park, but as a green space for art and nature and gentle wandering, much closer in spirit to the old culture park of 1969 than to the bright loud dream that had failed. The dinosaurs and the most broken rides have been cleared away. The wheel, beloved as it is, has been kept and cared for, repaired and preserved, a memorial to all the summers it spun above the Planterwald. So the strangest thing about Spree Park in the end is how its story curves all the way back around, like the wheel itself. It began as a gift to families in the forest. It drifted off into the wide world and got lost there in debt and distance and trouble. And then, very slowly, it came home, back to the quiet wood beside the river where it started, to be a place of green peace once more. Let that be the picture you carry as we rest here for a moment. Not the trouble, not the long sad journey, just the wheel, white against a grey Berlin sky, turning slowly in the wind above the old oaks of the Planterwald, creaking gently, going nowhere, in no hurry at all. The river slides by, the wind comes and goes, the wheel turns and slows and turns again, and the forest, patient and forgiving, holds it all softly in the dark. Breathe slowly now. We'll rest here a while. And when you're ready, we'll travel a long way east, across the whole of the world, to an island country where someone once tried to build a borrowed dream, and very nearly succeeded. Chapter 3. The Mirror of a Borrowed Dream. We travel now to Japan, to the old and gentle city of Nara. If you have never been, let me paint it for you softly, because the city matters to the story. Nara is one of the most ancient cities in all of Japan. More than 1,000 years ago, it was the country's capital, and it is still full of grand old wooden temples and quiet gardens. Tame deer wander its parks freely, bowing their heads to visitors, moving among the trees like soft brown shadows. It is a calm, deep, history-soaked place, a place of bells and incense and old stone lanterns green with moss. And on a hill on the edge of this most traditional of cities, for 45 years, there stood a near-perfect copy of an American dream. The story begins with a man named Kunizo Matsuo, a Japanese businessman, back in the late 1950s. Across the ocean, in California, a man named Walt Disney had recently opened a brand new kind of amusement park, a place called Disneyland, with a fairytale castle at its heart and a cheerful main street, and lands themed to adventure and fantasy and the future. It was unlike anything that had come before, and word of its magic spread around the world. Matsuo went to see it for himself, and he was enchanted. He came home determined to bring something just as wonderful to Japan. The The story goes that at first he hoped to work together with the Disney company to build an official Japanese version of their park, but the talks, by most accounts, did not come together. The two sides could not agree. And so Matsuo, undaunted, decided he would simply build his own. He would study what made Disneyland magical, and he would create something of his own that captured that same feeling, on a hill outside Nara. It opened in 1961, and it was called Nara Dreamland. And oh, it was a lovely thing. If you had walked through its gates in its early years, you might, for a heartbeat, have thought you'd been carried across the ocean to California. There was a grand entrance street lined with shops and lamps, much like the main street of its inspiration. There was a castle, tall and white with blue roofs, rising at the end of the avenue. There was a mountain, a great artificial peak with a bobsled ride that wound down through it, very like a famous mountain ride in the park that had inspired it. There was a monorail that glided around the grounds on a slender white track, and a pirate adventure, and a Wild West corner, and gardens, and fountains, and a wooden roller coaster that rumbled and roared. For Japanese families in the 1960s and 70s, especially those who could never dream of flying all the way to America, Nara Dreamland was a window into a brighter, more colourful world. Children pressed their faces to the monorail glass. Families posed for photographs in front of the White Castle. The wooden coaster, which was eventually called Asuka, carried screaming, laughing riders up and down its hills for decades. On a good summer day, the park could hold many thousands of happy people, and the air was full of music and the smell of popcorn and the particular joy of a place built entirely for delight. For more than 20 years, Nara Dreamland was one of the most beloved amusement parks in Japan. It had no real rival. It was the dream, and the country came to it. But dreams, even borrowed ones, are fragile things in the face of time, and the thing that finally undid Nara Dreamland was the very thing it had once imitated. Because eventually, the real thing came to Japan after all. In 1983, an official Tokyo Disneyland opened near the great eastern capital, an enormous, lavish, perfectly polished park backed by all the resources of the famous company. And years later, in 2001, another giant arrived, a huge Universal Studios park, built not far from Nara itself, in the nearby city of Osaka. Suddenly the gentle old hilltop park, with its careful homemade magic, was surrounded by far bigger, far newer, far flashier neighbours. Families who once would have driven up to Nara Dreamland now drove instead to the dazzling new parks, with their famous characters and their cutting-edge rides. The crowds at Nara Dreamland thinned, year by year, the way an old song fades when newer ones fill the radio. The park grew quieter, fewer families walked its main street, the wooden coaster still rumbled, but to emptier cars. And at last, in the summer of 2006, after 45 years of carrying the dreams of generations, Nara Dreamland closed its gates for the final time. The last visitors walked out, the lights went down, and the hill fell silent. Now here is what makes Nara Dreamland one of the strangest and most haunting of all the world's abandoned parks. When it closed, it was not torn down. It was not stripped or sold off in a hurry. It was simply left. Locked up and left exactly as it was, as if everyone had stepped out for the afternoon and would surely be back soon to switch the music on again. And so for a full 10 years, a complete amusement park sat on that hilltop outside Nara, perfectly arranged, perfectly still, slowly fading. The White Castle still stood at the end of the empty avenue, its paint softening, weeds rising through the cobbles before it. The monorail track curved through the trees, its cars frozen on the rails. The wooden coaster Asuka sat motionless on its great timber frame, the boarding platform gathering dust, the safety bars still raised as if waiting for the next eager riders to climb in. Shop signs faded. Ticket booths emptied. The carousel horses stood mid-gallop, going nowhere, their bright paint slowly chalking away in the rain. It became quietly and then famously a magnet for people who loved to photograph forgotten places. They would slip in over the years and come back with images that travelled all around the world, images of a fairy tale castle with grass growing up its steps, of a roller coaster being gently strangled by ivy, of a whole bright dream sitting empty and beautiful under the changing seasons. Snow fell on the silent park in winter. Cherry blossoms drifted down onto the empty paths in spring. The deer of Nara, so the stories go, sometimes wandered up the hill and through the broken fences, moving softly among the rides, the city's gentle old animals reclaiming the city's borrowed dream. There was something almost unbearably tender about it. Disneyland, the place that had inspired it, is always busy, always loud, always full. To see its quiet, faraway cousin standing empty and overgrown was to see what such a place looks like when all the people and all the music are gone, when only the bones of the dream remain. It was strange, and it was melancholy, and it was, in its own faded way, lovely. At last, in 2016, the time came. The land was sold, and the old park was finally cleared away. Over the course of a year, the castle came down, and the coaster, and the monorail track, and the main street, until the hilltop was bare again, ready for whatever would come next. Nara Dreamland, after 55 years of standing, both as a living park and as a sleeping one, was gone. But let's not feel too heavy about that, here in the dark. Because everything ends, and a thing that is gently cleared away after a long rest is not a tragedy. It is just the last gentle turn of a long story. For 45 years, Nara Dreamland gave joy. Children rode that wooden coaster and screamed with delight, and grew up and brought their own children. Families have photographs still, in albums and in drawers, of themselves young and laughing in front of that white castle. The dream did its work. It made people happy for a very long time. And then it rested for 10 quiet years on its hilltop, watched over by the deer and the seasons, and then it was let go. So as we settle here, picture it not in its final emptiness, but somewhere in the middle of its long sleep. A still afternoon on the hilltop outside ancient Nara, the white castle catching the late light, cherry petals drifting down across the silent main street, settling on the cobbles, on the faded shop signs, on the rails of the sleeping coaster. No sound but the wind in the trees and, perhaps, the soft step of a deer somewhere among the rides. The whole borrowed dream lying quiet and complete under the wide Japanese sky, neither happy nor sad, simply at peace, simply resting, the way you are resting now. Breathe in slowly. Breathe out. Let the white castle fade gently behind your eyes. We'll rest here a while in old Nara, among the deer and the cherry trees. And when you're ready, we'll travel a little way across Japan, to the foot of a great and famous mountain, where someone once built a giant, and then laid him down to sleep. Chapter 4. The Sleeping Giant. We stay in Japan a little longer, but we move now to one of the most strangely beautiful and short-lived parks ever built. A park whose centrepiece was not a wheel or a coaster, but a giant. A single enormous man, lying on his back, asleep on the ground. To find him, we travel toward the most famous mountain in all of Japan, Mount Fuji. You surely know its shape, even if you've never seen it in person. That perfect, gentle cone, snow-capped, rising alone above the land, so symmetrical it looks almost dreamed. For centuries it has been sacred. Poets have written about it, painters have painted it 10,000 times, and travellers have journeyed for days simply to stand and look at it. It is, perhaps, the most beloved mountain on earth. Around the base of Mount Fuji lies a region of forests and lakes, a high, cool, quiet country. And it was here, in this country at the foot of the sacred mountain, that a theme park opened in the spring of 1997. It was called Gulliver's Kingdom. The park took its theme from a very old story, a book written long ago by an Irish writer named Jonathan Swift, called Gulliver's Travels. In that story, a sailor named Gulliver is shipwrecked and washes up on the shore of a tiny country called Lilliput, where all the people are only a few inches tall. While he sleeps on the beach, exhausted, the little Lilliputians swarm over him and tie him down with hundreds of tiny ropes and stakes, so that when he wakes he finds himself a helpless giant, pinned to the ground by 1,000 threads, unable to rise. And that single image, the giant lying bound upon the earth, was the heart of the park. At the centre of Gulliver's kingdom, the builders had created an enormous statue of Gulliver himself, lying flat on his back, perhaps 45 metres long, his arms outstretched, his face turned up to the sky, exactly as he lies in the story when the little people pin him down. He was so large that you could walk all around him, stand beside his great resting head, look up at the curve of his chest rising like a hillside. There was even a slide built so that visitors could ride down across his huge reclining body. He was the giant of the park, and he simply lay there, calm and enormous and endlessly patient, gazing up at the clouds and at the slopes of Mount Fuji beyond. It should have worked, a giant at the foot of a sacred mountain. There was a real strange poetry to it. But Gulliver's kingdom, for all its bold central idea, struggled almost from the moment it opened. Part of the trouble was simply money and timing. The park had been an expensive thing to build, and it opened at a difficult moment, when the country's economy was not strong and families had less to spend on days out. Part of it was the location. The high country around Fuji is beautiful, but it can be cold and remote, harder to reach than the busy cities where the big parks thrived. And part of it, if we're honest, was that the area itself had come to carry a certain heaviness in people's minds, a quiet, hard-to-name reputation, the kind of place sometimes gathers over the years for reasons that have nothing to do with an amusement park. Some places, fairly or not, get spoken of in lowered voices, and this stretch of country near the great forests of Fuji had become one of them. None of that was the park's fault. But it sat in the air around the place, and perhaps it kept some families from coming. Whatever the reasons, the crowds never really arrived. The giant lay on his back, looking up at the sky, and the paths around him stayed quiet. The park opened in 1997, and by 2001, just 4 short years later, it had already closed. It was one of the briefest lives any major theme park has ever had. 4 summers, and then silence. And then came the strangest and most striking chapter, the years when Gulliver's Kingdom became one of the most photographed abandoned places in Japan. Because for a while after it closed, the park was simply left there, and the giant remained. And so travellers and photographers who made their way up into the high country found, waiting for them in the silence at the foot of Mount Fuji, an enormous man lying alone on the cold ground, his paint slowly peeling, his great upturned face weathering in the wind and rain, his outstretched arms gathering moss. The images are unforgettable. The vast pale figure stretched out across the earth, dwarfing the trees, dwarfing the people who stood beside him for scale, the sacred mountain rising in the distance behind him, the grey sky above. There was something in it that struck people as deeply strange and oddly moving. This fallen giant, this sleeping man the size of a building, abandoned and alone in one of the most beautiful and most haunting landscapes in the country. He looked, in those photographs, less like a ruined amusement park ride, and more like something out of a myth, a god who had lain down to rest at the foot of the holy mountain and simply never gotten up. A giant turned to stone in his sleep, waiting through the long years for someone to wake him. But of course he was never woken. The park did not reopen. There was no rescue, no revival, no second life. And in 2007, 6 years after the gates had closed, the time came at last to clear the site away. The giant was taken apart. The structures were demolished. The land at the foot of Mount Fuji was returned to quiet, given back to the high cool country and the forests and the wind. The sleeping giant of Gulliver's Kingdom was gone. And here, gently, is the comfort in it. Because there is comfort in almost every one of these stories, if we look for it softly. The giant is not still lying out there in the cold, abandoned and forgotten. He has been cleared away, his long strange vigil ended. The land is at peace, And what remains is the mountain, which was there long before the park and will be there long after, that perfect snow-capped cone rising serene above the forests. Unchanged, untroubled, eternal, the park was a brief flicker. 4 summers of a giant beneath the mountain, and then it was gone, and the mountain simply went on being the mountain, the way it always has, the way it always will. I find there's something restful in that, in the end. We build our strange and beautiful things, our giants and our castles and our wheels, and they last a little while, and then they're gone, and the old patient earth folds them back into itself and carries on. There's no sadness in it, not really, just the long, slow turning of things. The giant slept at the foot of the sacred mountain for a handful of years. Now he sleeps somewhere deeper, dismantled and at rest, and the mountain keeps watch over the quiet country where he used to lie. So picture it now, softly, as you drift, the high cool country at the foot of Mount Fuji, evening light on the snow far above, and out across the forested ground, in the years when he still lay there, the great pale giant on his back, arms open to the sky, perfectly still, perfectly calm, gazing up forever at the clouds passing over the sacred peak. Not afraid, not in pain, simply lying down, simply resting, simply sleeping, the way you are sleeping now, beneath the most beautiful mountain in the world. Let your breathing slow to match his stillness. There's nothing to do here, nothing to reach for. We'll rest a while at the foot of the mountain. And when you're ready, we'll cross the wide ocean to the warm south of America, to a city of music and water, where a whole bright park was put quietly to sleep by a single great storm. Chapter 5. The Water That Stayed. Now we cross the wide ocean all the way to the southern coast of the United States, to a city unlike any other. A city built on a great curve of the Mississippi River, just above where it spills out into the warm Gulf. A city of music drifting from open doorways, of iron balconies and old courtyards, of jazz and food and dancing and laughter. The city of New Orleans. New Orleans sits low. That's a thing you have to understand this story. The land around it is flat and low and damp, much of it actually below the level of the sea and the river, kept dry only by great walls and pumps and channels that hold the water back. For 300 years the city has lived in a kind of long, patient bargain with the water all around it. Most of the time the bargain holds. The city dances on, dry and warm and alive. On the eastern edge of New Orleans, out past the heart of the old city, a brand new amusement park opened in the spring of 2000. It was called Jazzland, and it was a love letter to the city itself, themed all around the music and the spirit of New Orleans. There were areas styled after the old French Quarter, with wrought iron and bright shutters. There was a Mardi Gras section, full of the colour of the city's great carnival. There were sections themed to the bayou, to the swamps and waterways of Louisiana. And there were rides, plenty of them. A tall wooden roller coaster called the Mega Zeph, which thundered along its track. A Ferris wheel. A carousel. Spinning rides and water rides in a great grinning clown's face, a jester, set up at the entrance to welcome everyone in. A few years later, in 2003, the big national company Six Flags took the park over and gave it their name, and added more rides still, and the park became Six Flags New Orleans. On warm evenings it glittered with lights. Families came after dark when the heat had eased, and the coaster roared and the music played, and the jester grinned over it all, and for a few good years it was exactly what it was meant to be. A bright, loud, joyful corner of one of the most joyful cities on earth. Then came the last week of August, in the year 2005. And out in the warm Gulf, the water that the city had bargained with for 300 years gathered itself into one of the most powerful storms the country had ever seen. Its name was Katrina. I'm going to tell this part gently and briefly, the way we tell all the hard parts here, because this one touched many lives, and it deserves to be spoken of with care. The storm came ashore near New Orleans, and the great walls that held the water back, the levees in several places gave way. and the water that the city had kept out for so long came in. Over the days that followed, much of New Orleans flooded. It was a terrible thing, one of the worst disasters the country has known, and a great many people lost their homes, and some lost much more than that. The city and its people carried a heavy grief in those days, and for a long time afterward. But the city did not die. I want to say that clearly and softly here, because it's the truth and it's the comfort. New Orleans endured. Its people came back. They pumped out the water, and they rebuilt their homes, and they returned to their streets. And within a few years the music was playing again in the open doorways, and the dancing returned, and the great carnival rolled through the streets once more. The city is alive today, as alive and as full of song as it ever was. The water came in and it was a hard, hard time, and then the people dried the city out and brought it back to life. That is what New Orleans does. That is who they are. But the amusement park, out on the low eastern edge of the city, was not so lucky. When the levees failed, the floodwater rolled across that low ground and filled the park, and it stayed. For weeks, the whole of Six Flags New Orleans sat under the water, several feet deep across most of the grounds, a still brown lake where a fairground had been. The water was brackish, full of salt from the Gulf and filth from the flood, and salt water is merciless to machinery. It soaked into every motor, every gear, every electrical heart of every ride. By the time the water was finally pumped away and the park stood drying in the sun again, everything in it had been ruined beyond saving. The metal had begun to rust the moment the salt touched it. The rides were dead, and so the park was simply abandoned. The company decided it could not be saved, and they walked away, and the gates were closed, and Six Flags New Orleans was left exactly where it stood, a whole drowned fairground on the edge of a recovering city. It has stood there ever since, for the better part of 20 years now, and it has become one of the strangest and most photographed abandoned places in all of America. Because it was never really cleaned up, never torn down for the longest time, never carried away, it just sat there, rusting, in the warm, wet Louisiana air. The pictures of it are like something from a dream. The great wooden coaster, the Mega Zeph slowly collapsing into the weeds, the Ferris wheel motionless, rusting against the big southern sky, and most famous of all, the Jester. That great grinning clown's face at the entrance, which had welcomed so many families in, left standing for years over the empty, ruined park, still smiling, while everything behind it rotted and rusted and was swallowed by the green. There is something deeply, strangely affecting about that smiling face presiding over all that quiet ruin, and it became, for a long time, one of the defining images of what the storm had left behind. Nature, as it always does, moved in. The warm, damp climate of Louisiana is generous to growing things, and the park became a jungle. Vines climbed the rides, reeds and grasses grew waist-high across the old paths and plazas. Frogs and birds and alligators, yes, real alligators, moved into the flooded low spots and the choked old water rides, making the drowned fairground their own. Over the years, urban explorers and filmmakers slipped in to wander through it, and the place even appeared, now and then as a ready-made ruin in films, because no set designer could have built anything half so eerie or so real. If you have ever spent a summer night in the Deep South, you know the particular softness of the air there after dark. The heat of the day eases, but the warmth stays, wrapped close and gentle as a held breath. The sky goes a deep velvet blue and then to black, and the stars come slow and few through the haze. And the sound. The southern night is never silent. There is the long soaring chorus of insects in the grass, rising and falling, a sound so steady and so old that it becomes a kind of silence of its own. There is the deep call of frogs from the wet hollows, and now and then the splash of something moving in the dark water. Imagine the drowned park lying in all of that, on a warm night near the river. The rusted wheel a dark shape against the stars, the grass tall and still. The warm air moving slow across the empty grounds, carrying the smell of green growing things and river mud and far-off rain. Nothing hurried. Nothing harsh, just the long warm breathing of a southern night, settling over the quiet rides like a blanket drawn up over a sleeping child. It is, in its strange way, one of the most peaceful places you could imagine, out there in the dark, with the city's distant glow on the horizon and the great river sliding endlessly past. For many years, the city tried and tried to decide what to do with it. Plan after plan was floated, to redevelop it, to rebuild it, to clear it for something new. Most came to nothing for the longest time. The drowned park simply sat, year after year, a strange green monument to the storm, slowly being taken apart by rust and weeds and time. In more recent years, the long process of finally clearing the site has at last begun to move forward, and the old ruined fairground is, piece by piece, being carried away to make room for whatever the city decides will come next. So let's set this one to rest gently, as we have the others. The hard part of this story, the storm and the grief it brought, belongs to the past, and the city it struck has long since stood back up and gone on singing. The park is only a thing, only metal and timber, and its slow rusting quiet has hurt no one. It has simply lain there, drowned and then drying, a strange green island of stillness on the edge of a living city, while New Orleans itself danced its way back to life all around it. Picture it now as you drift, but picture it kindly. Evening light, soft and golden, the way it falls in the warm south. The old Ferris wheel standing still against a sky going pink and orange over the river. Reeds whispering in the breeze across the silent grounds. A heron lifting slowly from the flooded hollow, where a water ride used to splash, and at the gate, faded now and gentle, the old jester's painted face, still smiling its long patient smile over a park that has finally, completely come to rest. The water came long ago, and then it went, and the city lived, and the park sleeps on in the warm Louisiana dusk, harming no one, frightening no one, simply resting, simply quiet, as the great river slides past in the dark. Breathe slowly. Let the warm southern evening settle over you. We'll rest here a while by the river. And when you're ready, we'll travel halfway around the world again, to the fields outside a vast and ancient city, where someone began to build a fairy tale castle, and then simply stopped. Chapter 6. The Castle in the Fields. Our next park is perhaps the strangest of them all, because it is a park that was never finished, and so was abandoned before it was ever truly alive. A dream that was started, and then simply set down and walked away from, and left standing half-built in the middle of a field, where for years the local farmers grew their crops right up to its walls. We travel now to China, to the wide flat country a little way to the northwest of the great capital city, Beijing. Beijing is one of the oldest and largest cities on Earth. A vast sea of buildings and people stretching to every horizon. But drive out of it, out past the edges where the city thins, and you come into farming country. Quiet villages and broad fields where people have grown grain and vegetables for countless generations. The land is flat and open, and in late summer it fills with tall green corn, rustling softly in the wind for kilometre after kilometre. It was here in this farming country near a small village in the late 1990s that an ambitious company set out to build something enormous. They wanted to create the largest amusement park in all of Asia, a grand and dazzling place that would draw visitors from across the country and beyond. It was to be called Wonderland. And at its heart, rising above the flat green fields, they planned a castle. Not a small one. A soaring fairy tale castle with tall spires and high white walls. The kind of castle that anchors a great theme park. The kind you see from far away and feel your heart lift at the sight of. They broke ground, and construction began. And for a little while the dream rose up out of the cornfields. The skeleton of the great castle climbed into the sky, a huge frame of grey steel and concrete, its towers reaching upward, its outline already grand, even unfinished. Around it, the beginnings of other buildings took shape. You could stand in the field and look up and begin to imagine it. The white walls that would clad those grey bones, the flags that would fly from those towers, the crowds that would one day pour through the gates. But the dream stalled. The reasons, as so often, came down to money and to disagreements over the land itself. There were disputes, it said, between the company and the local people, the farmers and villagers, over the price of the ground and the terms of the building. Costs rose. Talks broke down. And at some point, with the great castle still only a skeleton against the sky, the work simply stopped. The builders packed up and left, and the dream was abandoned, frozen exactly as it was, half-made, in the middle of the fields. And then something quietly extraordinary happened, something that made Wonderland one of the most strangely beautiful abandoned places anywhere in the world. The farmers came back. The land, after all, was good farming land, and it had been farmed for generations, and the half-built park was not using it. So the local people, practical and patient as farming people tend to be, simply went on with their work. They planted their crops, as they always had, in the open ground between and around the abandoned structures. And so for years there stood this astonishing sight, this image that travelled all around the world once photographers found it. A vast grey skeleton of a fairy-tale castle, rising lonely and enormous above a field of tall green corn. Farmers in straw hats working among the rows, their vegetables and their grain growing right up to the base of the great unfinished towers, goats and the occasional cow grazing in the shadow of the spires. The most fanciful of buildings, a castle out of a children's storybook, standing silent and unroofed in the most ordinary and ancient of settings, a working farmer's field. There was a real poetry to it, a strange, gentle magic. The castle that was meant to be the heart of a roaring, crowded amusement park instead presided over nothing but quiet fields and the slow turning of the agricultural seasons. In spring the ground around it was bare and brown and freshly turned. In summer the corn rose up green and tall until it nearly swallowed the lower structures. In autumn the fields turned gold and were harvested, and the castle stood over the stubble. In winter the snow came and settled on the grey towers and the empty land, and the whole scene went white and silent. Year after year the seasons rolled over the unfinished dream, and the farmers worked their rows, and the castle simply stood, neither built nor torn down, caught forever in the moment just before it might have come to life. People who went there said it was one of the most peaceful abandoned places they had ever visited, precisely because it had never been busy, never been full, never been loud. It carried no memory of crowds, no echo of music or screams of delight, because it had never had any. It was a silence that had always been silent, a dream that had only ever been a dream. To walk through it was to walk through a kind of beautiful unfinished thought, an idea that someone had begun to have, and then set gently aside. In time, of course, the question of what to do with it came up, as it always does. The land was valuable, and the half-built structures, lovely as they were in their lonely way, were not safe to leave standing forever. And so eventually, around the year 2013, the decision was made, and the great grey skeleton of the castle was at last taken down. The towers came apart, the frame was cleared away. The farmers, one imagines, simply kept on farming, the way they had through all of it, before the castle rose and after it fell. And later the talk turned to building something new on the site, something useful. Shops, perhaps, or offices, the ordinary business of a growing country. The fairy tale, such as it was over. But what a strange and gentle fairy tale it had been. A castle that was never finished, in a field that was always a field, watched over by farmers and grazing animals and the slow patient turning of the seasons. There was no tragedy in it, no disaster, no storm, no grief. Just an idea that was too big and too costly to finish, set down softly in the corn and left to the weather and the years. And that, I think, makes it one of the most restful of all our parks tonight, because it asks nothing of us. There is no sad ending to brace against, no hard part to soften. There is only the image of the great quiet castle standing in the field, and the corn rustling around it, and the wide flat country stretching away to the distant city, and the seasons coming and going. Soft and slow, and endless. So let that be the picture you hold as we rest here. A still evening in the farming country near Beijing, the sun going down red and huge over the flat horizon, the tall corn whispering in the warm wind. And rising above it all, dark against the fading sky, the lonely grey towers of a castle that was never finished and never will be now, standing silent over the patient fields, harming no one, troubling no one, simply there, the way a thing in a dream is simply there, until you wake, or until you slip down softly into a deeper sleep. Let your breathing slow. Let the corn whisper you down. We'll rest here a while in the fields, and when you're ready, we'll travel back across the ocean once more, to a quiet lake in the green American heartland, where an old park sat down among the trees nearly 100 years ago and let the forest gently grow it back into the earth. Chapter 7. The Forest That Came Back. For our next park, we come back across the ocean to the gentle green heartland of America, to the state of Ohio, and to a soft little body of water called Chippewa Lake. This is, in many ways, the most peaceful story we'll tell tonight, and one of the loveliest, because it's a story about how slowly and how kindly the forest takes back what people leave behind. There is no disaster here, no storm, no sudden ending, just the long quiet patience of trees. Chippewa Lake is a small natural lake in the rolling farm country of northern Ohio. Around it, in the years after the American Civil War, the land was green and gentle, dotted with little towns, the kind of unhurried place where people came to escape the heat of summer. And in the year 1878, on the shore of that quiet lake, an amusement park opened its doors. That's a very long time ago. It opened when the world still ran on horses and steam, when the telephone had only just been invented, when most of the people who would one day visit had not yet been born. Chippewa Lake Park would go on to entertain the families of Ohio for an entire century, a full 100 years, before its long story came to a close. In its heyday, in the early decades of the 20th century, it was a classic American lakeside park, the kind that once dotted the country, built at the end of a streetcar or railway line so that city families could ride out to the water for the day. There was a beach where children splashed in the shallows, there were boats out on the lake, there was a grand wooden roller coaster, a great rumbling thing called the Big Dipper, built in the 1920s, that carried riders up and over its hills with that wonderful mix of terror and delight. There was a carousel, painted horses rising and falling to the music of a band organ. There was a Ferris wheel turning slowly above the trees, lifting riders up to see the whole lake spread out blue and shining below. And there was a great ballroom, a dance hall, where on summer nights the big bands played and couples danced cheek to cheek with the windows open to the warm lake air. Picture those summer evenings, long ago, the string of coloured lights reflected in the dark water, the music of the band drifting out over the lake, the laughter of children worn out and happy after a long day in the sun, the Ferris wheel turning gently against a sky full of stars. For generations of Ohio families, Chippewa Lake Park was the very picture of summer, the place where the best days of childhood happened, year after year after year. But the world changed, as it always does. As the 20th century went on, the great age of the lakeside park slowly faded. Families got cars and could drive much farther afield to bigger and flashier attractions. The big new theme parks rose up and drew the crowds away. The old streetcar parks, charming as they were, began to feel small and old-fashioned, and one by one, all across the country they closed. And at Chippewa Lake, the crowds thinned, year by year, summer by summer, until at last, in 1978, exactly 100 years after it had opened, the park closed its gates for the final time. Now here is the strange and beautiful part, the part that has made Chippewa Lake one of the most quietly famous abandoned places in America. When the park closed, the rides were not taken down. The owners, for various reasons, simply locked the gates and walked away, and left everything standing exactly where it was. The roller coaster, the Ferris wheel, the carousel building, the ballroom, all of it, just left there on the shore of the lake. And then the forest, which had always stood at the edges of the park waiting, began very slowly to come back in. It did not happen quickly. Forests are patient. But year by year, season by season, the trees returned. First the weeds and the brambles crept across the old midways and parking lots. Then saplings took root in the cracked pavement, in the flower beds, in the very paths where children had once run. And those saplings grew, slowly, into young trees. And the young trees grew into tall ones, and the tall ones reached out their branches and joined together overhead, and a forest closed over the whole sleeping park. And the most remarkable thing of all was what happened with the rides. Because the trees did not grow only around the rides. In many places, they grew right up through them. A tree took root directly beneath the great Ferris wheel and grew up through the very centre of it, year after year, until the wheel was held in the arms of a full-grown tree, the rusting steel circle and the living green branches woven together into a single strange and beautiful thing. Trees grew up between the timbers of the old roller coaster, lifting and twisting the track, until you could no longer tell where the coaster ended and the woods began. The carousel building filled with leaves and saplings. The whole park, slowly, gently, completely, became a forest with the bones of a fairground hidden inside it. For decades it stood like that, and it became a kind of pilgrimage place for people who love forgotten things. They would make their way in through the trees and find themselves wandering through a real forest that was also, somehow, the ghost of 100 years of summers. The Ferris wheel held in the tree's embrace, the roller coaster vanishing into the green, the ballroom standing silent among the trunks, its dance floor carpeted with fallen leaves, the music long gone, the dancers long grown old or passed gently on. It was eerie, yes, but it was a soft and gentle eeriness, not frightening at all. More like walking through a beautiful dream of summers past. More like watching the earth tenderly tuck an old beloved worn-out thing into a blanket of green and let it sleep. Over the years, the elements and the occasional fire took their toll on the old wooden structures, and in time much of what remained was at last cleared away, and there has been talk, on and off, of building something new on that lovely shore. But for a long, long time, Chippewa Lake Park stood as one of the purest and most peaceful images of nature, reclaiming the human world that you could ever hope to see. A whole century of summer joy, slowly and lovingly folded back into the forest. And there's such comfort in that, isn't there? Nothing was lost, not really. The laughter that rang out across that lake for 100 years did not vanish. It simply soaked into the place, into the soil and the water and the trees. The children who rode that Ferris wheel grew up and lived their lives, and many of them carried the memory of those golden summer evenings all the way to the end of their days. And the park itself was not destroyed, not torn down in violence, not drowned or burned or abandoned in fear. It was simply, gently, let go, and the patient forest gathered it up and held it close and grew up softly all around it. So picture it now, as we settle here to rest. A still autumn afternoon at Chippewa Lake, golden light coming down through a canopy of trees, the lake beyond, calm and silver. And among the trees half hidden in the green, the soft rusted curve of an old Ferris wheel, held forever in the arms of a tall tree that grew up through its heart. Leaves drifting down one by one, settling on the old paths where children used to run. No sound but the wind in the high branches and, somewhere out on the lake, the call of a single bird. 100 summers, sleeping under the leaves. The forest, patient and kind, keeping its long green watch. And everything, completely and peacefully at rest. Let your breathing slow to the drift of the falling leaves. There is nowhere to be, nothing to do. We'll rest here a while by the quiet lake. And when you're ready, we'll travel west, far west, out of the green country and into the wide open desert, to find a most unlikely thing waiting in the sand and the sun. Chapter 8. The Oasis in the Sand. Now we travel to one of the strangest settings any amusement park has ever had. We're going out into the Great Mojave Desert, in the American West, to the long empty stretch of sand and rock and scrub that lies between the city of Los Angeles and the bright lights of Las Vegas. It is a hot, dry, enormous country, the desert. The land rolls away flat and pale to distant blue mountains. Spiky desert plants dot the ground. The sun beats down by day, fierce and white, and at night the sky fills with more stars than you have ever seen. Almost nothing lives out here, and almost nothing stays. It is the last place on earth you would ever expect to find a water park. And yet, for a few decades, that is exactly what stood out there in the sand. A water park. Slides and pools and splashing children in the middle of one of the driest deserts in America. The story began back in the late 1950s and early 1960s with a man named Bob Byers. He owned a piece of land out there in the desert, near a spot where, remarkably, there was water, a natural source bubbling up in that dry country. He began, at first, simply as a private retreat for his own family, building a little oasis around the water, with a lake and some slides. He named it Lake Dolores after his wife. It was a personal paradise, a green, wet corner in the brown, dry vastness, a place to bring the family on weekends and cool off under the desert sun. But it grew. Over the years, Byers added more and more to it, and eventually opened it to the public, and it became a genuine water park, one of the very first of its kind in the whole country. Travellers driving the long, hot highway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, sweating in their cars, would see the impossible sight of water slides rising up out of the desert, and they would pull off the road, hardly believing their eyes, to splash and cool off in this unlikely oasis. There were tall slides and pools and a long cable that you could ride out over the water and drop from. For a while, in its prime, it was a wonderful, joyful, deeply strange place. A burst of cool blue water and laughter in the middle of all that empty heat. Like so many of our parks, it had its ups and downs over the decades. It closed for a time, and then, in the late 1990s, new owners reopened it with a fresh new theme, all bright nostalgic 1950s style, with a new name, Rock-A-Hula, full of the music and the colours and the cheerful spirit of that earlier era. For a little while it sparkled again, this rock and roll water park in the desert, slides and music and splashing under the big western sky. But the desert is a hard place to keep a dream alive. It is remote, far from any city, expensive to reach and expensive to run, and the water and the equipment needed constant care under that punishing sun. There were money troubles. And, as gently as I can tell it, there was an accident there at one point. The kind of thing that can happen at any park where people slide and splash, and it led to difficulties and to the kind of legal trouble that can drain a small business dry. Whatever the full tangle of reasons, the park could not hold on. By the early 2000s, Rock-A-Hula closed for good. The water was switched off, the owners left, and the desert went to work. And here is where it became one of the most photographed abandoned places in the American West, because a water park left to die in the desert is a uniquely strange and striking thing to behold. The slides, those tall curving chutes that had once run with cool blue water, stood empty and baking in the relentless sun, their bright paint slowly bleaching and peeling. The pools dried up and cracked, their bottoms filling with wind-blown sand. The whole green oasis simply dried out and turned the same pale brown as the desert all around it, as if the desert were quietly drinking it back, reclaiming the little patch of wet that people had carved out of it for a while. Over the years, the empty slides became a famous canvas for graffiti artists, who covered them in swirls of bright colour so that the bleached bones of the park took on a strange new beauty, layers of paint and pattern glowing against the pale sand. Photographers came from all over to capture it: the curving empty slides, the dry cracked pools, the faded signs, all of it set against that enormous desert sky and those distant blue mountains. There is something about an abandoned water park in the desert that gets right under the skin. Water is life, out there. A water park is a little act of defiance against the desert, a stubborn human insistence on cool and wet and green in a place that wants to be hot and dry and bare. And to see that defiance fade, to see the desert patiently and gently take the water back, win the slow long argument it always wins in the end, is to feel something deep and quiet about how the wild old earth outlasts the things we build upon it. In time, the elements did their work on the structures, and there were fires and slow collapse, and the long erasing patience of sun and sand and wind. The bright slides faded further, the pools filled deeper with sand, and the oasis, year by year, melted back into the desert from which it had been so improbably conjured. There is a particular quality to a desert night that is worth resting in for a moment, because it may help carry you down towards sleep. When the sun finally drops behind the far mountains, the fierce heat of the day lifts away with surprising speed, and a deep, dry, gentle cool comes settling over the sand. The light goes from white to gold to a long lingering rose, and then to a blue so deep it is almost purple, and then to black. And in that blackness, out there where no city glow reaches, the stars come out in numbers you can scarcely believe. Not the few scattered points you might see above a town, but thousands upon thousands of them, a great silver dust spilled clear across the whole dome of the sky. The pale river of the Milky Way arching from one horizon to the other. The empty slides stand silent beneath all of it, pale shapes against the dark, and the only sound is the soft hush of the wind moving over the dunes, and perhaps, far off, the small call of some desert creature going about its quiet night. It is one of the most peaceful sights on earth, that desert sky, and people drive for hours just to lie on their backs in the sand and look up at it. Imagine yourself there now, warm and safe and still, the cool air soft on your face, the great wheel of stars turning slow and silent above the sleeping oasis. But let's hold the gentle truth of it, as we always do. There is no sorrow out there in the sand. Not really. The park gave decades of cool blue joy to travellers crossing one of the hottest roads in the country. Children who would never otherwise have splashed and slid that day pulled off the highway and had an afternoon of pure delight in the middle of the desert, and then drove on, refreshed and laughing, carrying the memory with them. And when the park's time was done, it was not destroyed in any cruel way. It simply dried up, gently, under the sun, and the great patient desert, which was there for millions of years before the park, and will be there for millions of years after, quietly folded the little oasis back into itself. So picture it now, as you drift towards sleep. The vast Mojave Desert at the end of the day, the sun sinking low and huge and orange toward the distant mountains, painting the whole sky in colours. The empty curving slides standing pale and quiet against the fading light, their long shadows stretching out across the sand. A warm, dry wind moving softly over the dunes, whispering through the dry pools. The first few stars beginning to prick out in the darkening sky, more and more of them, the way they do out there where nothing blocks the heavens, and the old oasis lying still and peaceful in the cooling sand. No water now, no laughter now, but no pain either, no fear, just the deep quiet of the desert night settling over the sleeping slides, soft and endless and calm. Let that warm desert dusk settle over you. Let the wide quiet of it hold you. We'll rest here a while beneath the desert stars, and when you're ready, we'll travel all the way back across the world again, to the misty hills of Japan, to a park so wrapped in fog and strange stories that some people came to wonder whether it had ever truly been there at all. Chapter 9. The Park in the Fog. We return now to Japan one last time, to the northern country, to a region of green hills and rice fields and soft, frequent mist. And we come to a park that has become famous less for what it was than for how it looked in its final sleeping years, wrapped almost always in a thick white fog, so that the photographs of it look less like pictures of a real place and more like pictures of a dream, or a memory, or a place from a story your grandmother might have told you long ago. The park was called Takakanonuma Greenland. Let me say the name softly for you, because it's a lovely one to drift off to. Takakanonuma Greenland. It sat in the hills of Fukushima Prefecture, in the northeast of the main island of Japan, in a green and gentle and rather remote stretch of country. Now I have to be honest with you here, more honest than usual, because this park has gathered around it more legends and strange stories than almost any other abandoned place in the world, and many of those stories are not really true, or at least cannot be shown to be true. People love a mystery, and they have draped this quiet little park in mystery the way the fog itself draped it, until it's genuinely hard to see the real place underneath. So we'll move gently, and I'll tell you what seems to be real, and I'll tell you which parts are just stories, and you can let all of it wash over you softly, true and untrue alike, the way you might let a fairy tale wash over you as you fall asleep, without worrying too much about which parts really happened. What seems to be true is this. The park first opened in the early 1970s. It was a fairly ordinary regional amusement park, with the usual cheerful things, rides and a roller coaster and a Ferris wheel and food stalls, the kind of modest park a country region builds for its families. And it had a difficult life. It opened, and then, after only a short time, it closed again, just a couple of years later. The reasons given vary in the telling. Some say simply that not enough visitors came, that the remote location and the quiet local population could not support it. That is almost certainly the real reason, the same plain, undramatic reason so many parks have failed. Not enough people, not enough money. But here is where the stories begin, because some tellers over the years have whispered that the park closed not for ordinary reasons of money, but because of something darker. Accidents, tragedies, a place that was somehow unlucky or unhappy. I want to set those whispers gently to one side. There is no good evidence for them. They are the kind of tales that grow up around any abandoned place, especially a foggy and atmospheric one, the way mushrooms grow up in the damp. So let them go. The park most likely closed for the plainest of reasons, and there is no hidden horror beneath it. Hold that thought and rest easy. After that first closure, the park did not stay closed forever. In the mid-1980s it reopened, given a fresh start, and for a while it ran again. This modest little fairground in the misty hills, its Ferris wheel turning above the rice fields, its roller coaster rattling through the soft northern air. For about a dozen years it carried on, quietly, never famous, never crowded, just a small local park doing its small local work of giving country families a cheerful day out. But the same slow tide that pulled the crowds away from so many of our parks tonight pulled them away from here too. The big new attractions, the changing times, the simple remoteness of the place. And so at the very end of the 1990s, in 1999, Takakanonuma Greenland closed for the final time, and this time it did not reopen. The gates were locked, the rides fell silent, and the fog rolled in. And oh, the fog. This is the thing that made the place legendary. The park sat in a low, damp, hilly area where mist gathers thick and often, especially in the cool mornings and evenings. And so when photographers and explorers began, in the years after it closed, to make their way up to the abandoned park, they found it again and again wreathed in dense white fog. So thick you could barely see from one ride to the next, and the photographs they brought back were extraordinary and a little uncanny, and unlike almost any other abandoned place on Earth. Picture them. A roller coaster track curving up and disappearing into solid white nothingness, as if it climbed straight into the clouds and never came down. A Ferris wheel standing half dissolved in the mist, its upper half simply gone, swallowed by the white. Pathways vanishing into fog after a few steps. Rusting rides looming up suddenly out of the whiteness and then fading back into it. The whole park seeming to float in a soft white void, half there and half not there, more a place glimpsed in a dream than a place you could actually walk through. The images travelled all around the world on the early internet, and they were so strange and so beautiful and so dreamlike that some people, looking at them, began to wonder whether the place was even real. Stories spread that the park was almost impossible to find, that it did not appear on maps, that people who went looking for it got lost in the fog and never found it, that it appeared and disappeared like something enchanted. None of that is really true, of course. It was a real park in a real place that you could find on a real map if you knew where to look. But you can see how the fog and the silence and the dreamlike photographs gave birth to such tales. The place simply looked like a legend, and so people made legends about it. In time, a few years into the new century, around 2006, the park was at last demolished and cleared away, the rides taken down, the misty hilltop returned to quiet. And so today there is nothing left of Takakananuma, Greenland, but those haunting white photographs, the Ferris wheel half lost in the fog, the roller coaster climbing into the clouds. The real park is gone. Only the dream of it remains, and there is something perfect about that, isn't there? For a place that always looked more like a dream than a fact. A park made of fog was always going to fade. It was never quite solid to begin with, never quite fully there. And now it has done what fog does. It has gently lifted and drifted away and left the hills clear and quiet behind it. So let go of all the stories now, the true and the untrue alike. There was no horror there, just a small park in the misty hills that lived a quiet life and then went to sleep wrapped in white, and was photographed in its sleeping years looking like something out of a fairy tale, and then was let go. Picture it one last time, softly, the way the photographs show it. The Ferris wheel standing motionless in the thick white fog, its top half vanished into nothing. The silent roller coaster curving gently up and disappearing into the soft white sky. Everything still. Everything quiet. Everything half dissolved into the gentle mist, fading slowly, peacefully, dreamily, the way the edges of the room are fading now as you drift down towards sleep. Let the fog wrap softly around you. Let the edges of everything go soft and white and quiet. We'll rest here a while in the misty hills. And when you're ready, we'll make one last journey, back across the ocean to the green mountains of the American South, to a very old piece of ground, and a small park with some very tall tales, where we'll gently sort the legends from the truth and lay them all down to rest. Chapter 10. The Old Ground. For our next park, we travel to the green and folded mountains of West Virginia in the American South. This is old country of steep wooded hills and narrow valleys, of mist in the hollows and slow rivers winding between the ridges. And tucked into this country, beside a small lake in Mercer County, there sits a little amusement park called Lake Shawnee. It is a place with a long memory, and around it have grown more ghost stories than perhaps any other park in America. So tonight, gently, we'll walk through those stories, and we'll sort the few small facts from the many tall tales, and we'll lay all of it softly down to rest. The ground itself is older than the park by a very long way. Long before there was ever a Ferris wheel or a swing ride here, back in the earliest frontier days of America, in the late 1700s, this valley was a place where settlers and the native peoples whose land this had always been came into hard and tragic contact, as happened all across that frontier in those years. There was sorrow on this ground, long, long ago, the kind of frontier sorrow that touched countless valleys in those harsh and distant times. I won't dwell on it, because it was more than 2 centuries ago, and the people of that time, on every side, are long, long at rest now. Their griefs and their struggles softened entirely by the passing of so many years. But it's worth knowing, because much of the later legend of the place grew from a half-remembered sense that this was old ground that had seen sadness before the laughter ever came. The laughter came in the 1920s. A man named Conley Sniddow bought the land and built an amusement park there, on the shore of the little lake, opening it up around the middle of that decade. And for 40 years it was simply a beloved local park, the summer heart of the whole region. There was a swing ride, the kind that lifts you out and around in a wide circle. There was a Ferris wheel turning above the water. There were swimming areas in the lake, and dance pavilions and food and music, and all the ordinary summer joy that a country park brings to the families around it. Generations of West Virginia children spent their best summer days at Lake Shawnee. It was, for a long time, a happy place, full of life. Now, over those 40 years, as happens at almost any place where great crowds gather over many decades, there were a small number of sad accidents. 2 in particular have become woven into the legend of the park, and I'll tell them to you very gently, because they involved children, and because they were genuine sorrows for the families involved, long ago. In one, a young girl was hurt on the swing ride, in a terrible piece of bad luck, and did not survive. In another, a young boy drowned in the pond. These were real losses, and they grieved the community at the time. But I want you to hold them softly, the way you'd hold any old sorrow. They happened many decades ago. The children, and all who loved and mourned them, are long at peace now. Time, which heals so slowly and so surely, has carried all that grief gently downstream and laid it to rest. There is nothing here now but quiet. The park closed in the 1960s, around 1966, after those decades of summers. For a long while the land sat quiet, the rides standing still beside the lake, the swings hanging motionless, the Ferris wheel turning only when the wind pushed it. And it was during those quiet decades that the place gathered its reputation. Because here was an old amusement park, closed and still, on ground that people dimly remembered had seen frontier sorrow long ago, where a couple of sad accidents had happened over the years. And human imagination, which loves nothing more than a shiver, did the rest. People began to call it haunted. Stories spread of strange sounds, of swings that moved on their own, of feelings of being watched. The place became famous, in time, as one of the most haunted spots in America, and ghost hunters and television crews came to film there in the dark. And here, in the calm spirit of this channel, is where I want to set the record gently straight. Because honesty is more restful than fear. There are no ghosts at Lake Shawnee. Or rather, there is no evidence of any. Nothing but stories, and the natural creak and groan of old metal in the wind, and the powerful way the human mind fills a quiet, old, melancholy place with whatever it most expects to find. A swing that moves on its own is moved by the breeze. A strange sound in an old park is the settling of rust and timber. The feeling of being watched is the feeling any of us gets in a still and lonely place where sad things are known to have happened long ago. The legends are not lies exactly. They are just the shapes our imaginations make in the dark. And once you know that, the place stops being frightening at all, and becomes instead simply what it truly is. A quiet, gentle, slightly melancholy old park beside a small lake, full of the soft echoes of 100,000 happy summer afternoons, and touched, here and there, by a few old sorrows that have long since healed over. In more recent years, parts of the old park have actually been cleaned up and brought back to gentle life. Some of the old rides still stand, and the place opens now and then for visitors. And even, on certain days for ordinary cheerful fun once more, families wandering the grounds, children looking up at the old swing ride and the rusting Ferris wheel against the green mountains. The ground that people once called cursed is in truth just a pretty piece of West Virginia hill country, beside a quiet lake, holding its long memories softly. So let's lay it all down to rest now, the frontier sorrows and the sad old accidents and all the shivery ghost stories alike. There is nothing here to fear. There never was. Only old ground and a small old park and the gentle weight of time. The children are at rest. The settlers and the native peoples of those distant frontier days are at rest. The grief is at rest. Everything here is at rest. Picture it then as you drift. A soft summer evening in the green West Virginia mountains, mist gathering in the hollows, the little lake lying still and silver in the fading light, the old swing ride and the rusting Ferris wheel standing quiet against the dark wooded ridges, swaying just slightly when a breeze comes down off the hills, fireflies beginning to rise from the long grass, drifting up gold and slow into the dusk. No fear here, no sorrow that has not long since softened into peace. Just an old park, beside an old lake, in old and gentle country, settling down quietly into another summer night, the way you are settling down now, soft and safe and calm. Let the mountain dusk settle over you. Let the fireflies drift up through the dark. We'll rest here a while in the green hills. And when you're ready, we'll travel up onto a high mountain top to a most enchanting little park where a yellow brick road still winds through the trees, waiting for a girl named Dorothy who long ago went home. Chapter 11. The Yellow Brick Road. For our next to last park, we stay in the green mountains of the American South, but we climb, up and up into the high country of North Carolina, to the very top of a mountain called Beech Mountain, one of the highest peaks in all the eastern United States. Up here the air is cool and thin and clean even in the height of summer. Clouds drift below you, in the valleys. The trees grow gnarled and wind-shaped near the summit. And it was here, on this high and misty mountain top, that someone once built a park out of one of the most beloved stories in the world. The story of the Wizard of Oz. You surely know the story, or at least the famous old film of it. A young girl named Dorothy, from the flat plains of Kansas, is swept up by a great whirling storm and carried away to a magical land called Oz, full of colour and wonder and a little danger too. To find her way home, she must follow a road paved with yellow brick, all the way to a great emerald city, gathering friends along the way, a scarecrow, a tin man, a lion. It is a story about being carried far from home, and about the long winding journey back, and about discovering that home was inside you all along. It is, when you think about it, a perfect story to drift off to. In 1970, a park based on that story opened on the top of Beech Mountain, and it was called the Land of Oz. And it was a genuinely magical little place, unlike any other park we visited tonight, because it wasn't really about thrilling rides at all. It was about walking, gently, through a story. Visitors would begin at a recreation of Dorothy's farmhouse in Kansas, a humble little farm at the edge of the mountaintop, and then they would set off, on foot, following an actual yellow brick road made of real yellow bricks that wound away from the farm and down through the trees and gardens of the mountaintop. As you walked that yellow road, the story unfolded around you. You would pass the spot where Dorothy meets the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion. You would wind through enchanted gardens and past little scenes from the tale. Performers in costume would greet you along the way. The characters from the story come to life on the misty mountain. And at the end of the long winding road, you would arrive at the Emerald City itself, green and gleaming at the summit. It was less an amusement park than a walk through a beloved dream, a chance to step inside a story you had loved as a child, and follow its golden road with your own feet, high up where the clouds drifted by. For a few years the Land of Oz was a wonderful success. Families came from all over to walk the yellow brick road on the mountaintop. But the park's life, sadly, was a short one. In the mid-1970s, just a few years after it opened, it suffered a run of hard luck. There was a fire that damaged part of the park, including the Emerald City. Some of the precious original costumes and treasures from the famous old film, which had been kept there, were lost or stolen. And these blows, along with the simple difficulty of running a park on top of a remote and weather-beaten mountain, where winter comes hard and the season is short, slowly drained the magic away. Visitors dwindled, and in 1980, after only 10 years, the Land of Oz closed its gates and the yellow brick road fell silent. And then, for a long time, the most enchanting thing happened. The thing that has made this park so beloved among all the world's forgotten places. Because the Land of Oz was not torn down. It was simply left, up there on the misty mountaintop, and slowly, gently, the high country began to reclaim it. The yellow brick road, that magical winding path, did not disappear. It stayed. But the forest grew up close around it, and moss crept in between the bricks, and fallen leaves drifted across it, and ferns leaned in from the edges, until the yellow road wound on through what looked like an enchanted, overgrown wood. Dorothy's little farmhouse stood quiet among the trees. The scenes from the story softened and faded, and were wrapped in green, and the whole place took on exactly the air of a magical land that had been left asleep under a spell, waiting, patient, for someone to come and wake it. It is hard to imagine a more perfect and gentle image than that. A real yellow brick road, winding away through a misty mountain forest, mossy and leaf-strewn and overgrown, leading off toward an emerald city lost in the trees. A story about finding the long way home, left to dream on a mountaintop. People who managed to glimpse it in those abandoned years said it was less eerie than simply enchanting, as though they had stumbled into the quiet after the story ends, the long, peaceful sleep of a fairy tale that has been told and is now resting. And here is the loveliest part of all, the part that sets this park apart from nearly every other we've visited. The Land of Oz did not vanish. In recent years it has been lovingly, gently brought back to life. The yellow brick road has been cared for and restored. Dorothy's farmhouse stands once more. And on special days, particularly in the autumn, the park opens again and families return to walk the yellow brick road through the high mountain forest, and the magic, which only ever slept, wakes up once more. It is one of the few parks in all our journey tonight that got, in the end, something very like a happy ending. The road that was left to the moss and the leaves is golden again, at least for a few precious days each year, and children once more skip down it through the clouds. So this is a gentle one to rest on, with no sorrow in it at all, only enchantment. Picture it now, as you drift. The very top of a green mountain, with clouds moving softly through the valleys far below, the cool, clean air, the misty forest, hushed and still, and winding away through the trees, mossy and leaf-strewn and golden, the yellow brick road, curving gently out of sight among the ferns, leading off toward an emerald city somewhere in the green. Dorothy's little farmhouse waiting quietly among the trees, the whole enchanted land sleeping softly under its gentle spell, high up where the clouds drift by, waiting, patient and peaceful, for the next bright autumn morning, when the children will come skipping down the golden road again. Let that golden road wind gently through your dreams. Let the cool mountain mist settle soft around you. We'll rest here a while at the top of the world, and when you're ready, we'll make our very last journey of the night, across the ocean once more, to a green corner of England, where knights and dragons once rode, and where a castle stood empty in a quiet field before its story too came gently to a close. Chapter 12. The Empty Castle. We come now to the last park of our long night's journey. For this one we travel to England, to the green and gentle countryside of the northwest, in the county of Lancashire, a country of soft rolling fields and old hedgerows and frequent quiet rain. And here, in the flat green farmland between two old towns, there once rose a castle, with towers and battlements and fluttering flags, where for a quarter of a century knights rode out on horseback, and dragons breathed pretend fire, and children cheered. It was called Camelot. The name comes, of course, from the oldest and most beloved of all English legends, the story of King Arthur. You will have heard at least pieces of it. The young king who drew a sword from a stone to prove his right to rule. The great round table where his knights sat as equals. The wizard Merlin, with his long beard and his deep magic, the quest for the Holy Grail, and the king's shining castle, the heart of his realm, the most famous castle in all of legend, which was called Camelot. It is a story of nobility and adventure and a golden age, and it has been told and retold in England for the better part of 1,000 years. In 1983, a theme park opened on that Lancashire farmland and took the legend for its theme. It built a great mock castle, with high walls and towers and a drawbridge, and it filled its grounds with everything a child might dream of from the age of knights. There were jousting shows, where costumed knights on real horses thundered toward each other with lances to the roar of the crowd. There were birds of prey, hawks and owls and eagles soaring over the grounds in falconry displays. There was a wizard school and medieval banquets, and of course, as the years went on, the usual thrilling rides too. Roller coasters and water rides woven in among the castles and the legend. For families across the north of England, a day at Camelot was a day of pure adventure, a chance to step back into the age of knights and dragons, to watch the jousting and feel the thunder of the horses and cheer for the brave. For a good long while the park thrived. Through the 1980s and 1990s and into the new century, Camelot drew its crowds, and the knights rode, and the children cheered, and all was well. But slowly, as the new century went on, the same tide that ebbs through so many of our stories began to ebb here too. Tastes changed. The big modern parks, with their record-breaking rides, drew the thrill-seekers away. A run of cold, wet summers, and England can certainly provide those, kept the families home. Money grew tight, and the crowds, year by year, began to thin. And at last, in 2012, after nearly 30 years of jousting and adventure, Camelot closed its gates. The knights rode out for the final time. The crowds went home. The drawbridge came up, in a manner of speaking, and the great mock castle stood silent and empty in the green Lancashire fields. And for several years after that, Camelot became one of the most striking abandoned places in all of Britain. Because there is something especially poignant about an abandoned castle, even a pretend one, especially one named for the most legendary castle of all. The great walls and towers stood empty in the rain. The jousting arena, where the horses had thundered, grew over with grass. The roller coasters stood frozen and rusting against the grey English sky. The medieval banquet hall fell silent. And the whole place, built to celebrate a golden age of legend, settled into its own quiet melancholy, an empty Camelot in an empty field, the flags gone ragged, the painted dragons fading in the weather, the whole bright dream of knights and adventure left to the rain and the crows. There was a real and gentle irony in it that people felt keenly. The original Camelot, the legendary one, was itself a symbol of a golden age that had passed, a shining time of nobility and adventure that, in the old stories, faded and fell and was lost, leaving only memory and legend behind. King Arthur's Camelot was always, in the telling, a thing that had been and was no more, a glory remembered rather than a glory present. And here was a real Camelot doing the very same thing, having its bright noble day and then fading, standing empty and overgrown, a ruin of a legend about a ruin. The abandoned English castle, silent in its green fields, echoed the very story it had been built to tell. In time, a few years into the abandonment, around the year 2020, the decision came at last to clear the site. The towers were taken down, the rides removed, the great walls dismantled, and the green Lancashire fields were returned to quiet, ready for whatever ordinary new use the land would find. The pretend Camelot, like the legendary one before it, passed gently out of the world, leaving behind only photographs and memories and the recollections of all the families who had cheered there on summer afternoons. But that is no sad ending, not really, not when you think of it rightly, because the legend of Camelot was always about how the bright and noble things of the world shine for their season and then pass on, and how that passing is not a tragedy, but simply the way of things, the turning of the long story. The real Camelot Park did exactly what its namesake did. It rose, it shone, it gave nearly 30 years of adventure and delight to the children of the north of England, and then, its season done, it faded gently away. The knights who jousted there are remembered, the children who cheered are grown now, and many of them carry the memory of those thundering horses to this day. The golden age was real while it lasted, and the memory of it is gentle and warm, and the empty fields where it stood are at peace. So picture it now, as we come to the end of our journey, this last quiet castle in the grain, a soft grey English evening, with a fine mist of rain drifting down. The great empty walls and towers of Camelot standing dark against the pale wet sky, flags hanging still and heavy. The jousting field where the horses once thundered, lying quiet and green, the grass grown long. A few crows wheeling slowly over the silent battlements, and then settling, the whole legend at rest in the rain, neither happy nor sad, simply finished, simply still, the golden age passed gently into memory. The way all golden ages must, the way the day passes gently into night. Let the soft English rain settle over you. Let the empty castle stand quiet in the dusk. We have come to the end of our travels now, and there is nothing left to do but rest. Chapter 13. The Dragon by the Lake. I told you the last park was the final one, and the journey home has begun, but there is one more place I want to show you before we let the night close over us completely. It is one of the strangest and most beautiful of them all, and it makes a gentle place to end our travels, because at its heart there sleeps a dragon, coiled quietly around a hill above a still green lake. We travel for the last time tonight, across the world to the country of Vietnam, to the old imperial city of Hue, in the green heart of the country. Hue is an ancient and lovely city, the former seat of Vietnam's emperors, full of old palaces and tombs and walled gardens, set among rivers and hills and rice paddies of an almost impossibly vivid green. And in the hills just outside the city, beside a quiet lake ringed with pine trees, someone set out around 20 years ago to build a grand water park. Its name was Ho Thoi Tien. It was meant to be wonderful. The plans were ambitious, a whole leisure park spread around the shores and islands of the lake, with water slides and pools and gardens, and as its glittering centrepiece, an enormous aquarium. And this aquarium was to be the strangest and most spectacular thing of all. It was built on a small island in the lake, in the shape of a vast dragon. For in Vietnam, as across much of Asia, the dragon is not a fearsome monster, as it is in the old tales of the West, but a noble and benevolent creature, a bringer of rain and rivers and good fortune, a guardian and a giver of life. And so they built one, huge, its long, sinuous body coiling up and over a great domed building, its head rearing high above the lake, its mouth open at the very top, where, the idea was, visitors could climb up inside the dragon's body and look out from between its jaws over the whole green valley and the shining water below. It was a glorious and slightly mad idea, a building shaped like a benevolent dragon, holding an aquarium full of fish and sea creatures, perched on an island in a quiet lake among the Vietnamese hills. And for a little while around the middle of the 2000s, parts of it did open, and visitors did come, and the dragon did keep its watch over splashing children and shining water. But the park, like so many of our parks tonight, ran into difficulty. The full grand vision was never quite finished. Money troubles and changing plans, and the simple enormous cost of it all, meant that much of the park never properly opened at all, and the parts that did open struggled to draw the crowds the builders had hoped for. And so, gradually, quietly, the whole place was simply left, half built and half abandoned, the unfinished pools left to fill with rain, the slides left silent, and the great dragon left alone on its island, coiled around its empty aquarium, gazing out forever over the still and lonely lake. And then nature, in that warm and watery green country, did what it does so quickly and so beautifully in the tropics. It moved in fast. The pools and waterways filled with lily pads and reeds and bright green algae. Vines and creepers climbed the slides and the abandoned buildings. The pine trees around the lake leaned in, birds nested in the rafters. The whole park became a lush, overgrown, dreamlike garden, half water and half jungle, with the great grey dragon rising up out of the green at the centre of it all, vines beginning to trail across its scales, its open mouth still gazing out over the misty water. It became, in time, one of the most famous abandoned places in all of Asia, and one of the most photographed, because the images of it are simply unforgettable. The colossal dragon, coiled and serene, rising from an island wrapped in green. The still lake reflecting the pines and the sky. The empty water slides curving down into the reeds. The whole place silent and lush and strange. More like a lost temple than a failed water park. More like something an explorer might stumble upon deep in the jungle after 100 years. An ancient dragon shrine swallowed by the green, than like anything built in our own time. People who made their way there, climbing up at last inside the dragon's body to look out from between its jaws over the green valley and the shining lake, said it was one of the most peaceful and otherworldly places they had ever stood. And there is, I think, no better note to end our travels on than that great gentle dragon by the lake. Because the dragon, in the old Vietnamese understanding, is a guardian, a protector, a benevolent watcher over the water and the land, and that is exactly what this one became. Not a monster guarding treasure, but a kindly old guardian, coiled quietly around an empty hill, keeping its long patient watch over a still green lake and a garden slowly returning to the wild. There is nothing frightening in it. There is something almost tender in it. This huge serene creature left alone in the quiet, gazing out over the misty water year after year, vines softening its scales, birds nesting in its jaws, watching the lily pads spread and the pines grow tall and the seasons turn, asking nothing, harming nothing, simply keeping watch, the way a guardian does, while everything around it sinks gently and beautifully into peace. In recent years the place has been tidied and looked after a little, opened up gently for quiet visitors who come to see the famous dragon and walk the green overgrown paths. But its spirit has not changed. It is still at heart a slumbering dragon by a still lake in the green hills of Vietnam, a guardian at rest, watching over the quiet. So let that be the last picture of our long night's journey. The green hills of Hue at dusk. A still lake, smooth as glass, holding the reflection of the pines and the darkening sky. Lily pads spread across the quiet water, and rising from a small island at the centre of it all, dark and serene against the last of the light, the great coiled dragon, its long body wrapped around the hill, its head lifted high, its open mouth gazing out over the water, keeping its calm and ancient watch as the night comes softly down. A guardian, at peace. A dragon, sleeping, the water still. The whole green valley breathing slow, and everything, everywhere, at last, at rest. Let the still lake hold you. Let the gentle dragon keep its watch over your sleep. Our travels are done now, and you are safe, and there is nothing left but rest. We have come a long way tonight, you and I. We have travelled all the way around the world and back again, from the cold forests of Ukraine to the warm hills of Vietnam, and we have stood quietly in front of a great many silent wheels and sleeping castles and dreaming dragons. There is something all of these strange places have in common, something gentle that I hope has settled over you as we wandered. Every one of them was built for joy. Every single one. The wheel in Pripyat, the white wheel turning in the Berlin wind, the borrowed dream on the hill in Nara, the giant beneath the sacred mountain, the bright park drowned by the warm southern water, the unfinished castle in the Chinese corn, the old rides held in the arms of the Ohio trees, the impossible oasis in the desert, the park dissolving in the Japanese fog, the old quiet park in the West Virginia hills, the yellow road winding through the mountain mist, the empty Camelot in the English rain, and the great serene dragon by the green Vietnamese lake. Every one of them was built so that people could laugh and rise up above the rooftops and feel for an afternoon that the world was bright and full of wonder. And every one of them gave that gift. For a season. And then its season ended, and the people went home, and the quiet came in, and the patient old earth began, softly, to take it all back. Trees grew up through the wheels, vines climbed the dragons, fog wrapped the towers, sand filled the pools. Forests closed gently over 100 years of summers. And there was no tragedy in any of it, not really, not in the end. Just the long, slow, kindly turning of things. Just the world doing what the world always does, gathering up the bright things we make and folding them back into the green and the quiet, the way a parent gathers up a sleeping child and carries them softly to bed. That is all these places are doing now. They are sleeping. The wheels have stopped. The music has faded. The crowds have long since gone home and grown old and dreamed their own dreams. And the parks lie quiet under the stars, harming no one, frightening no one, simply resting, simply at peace. While the trees grow and the seasons turn and the gentle world keeps watch over them all. And now it is time for you to rest too. There is nothing more to see tonight, nowhere more to travel. The lights are low, the story is told. You are safe and warm and exactly where you should be. You can let the last pictures fade now. The wheel and the castle and the dragon all going soft and dim. You can let your thoughts slow and grow quiet and drift, the way the fog drifts, the way the leaves drift down, the way everything we visited tonight has drifted gently into rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your body grow heavy and soft against the bed. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to hold on to, nothing left to think about at all. The wheels are still. The water is calm. The dragon keeps its quiet watch. And the whole sleeping world is holding you gently, carrying you softly down, the way it carries all its tired and beloved things, into the deep and peaceful dark. Rest now. You have travelled far enough. Everything is quiet, and everything is at peace, and everything, everywhere, is finally gently at rest. Sleep well. Sleep deep. And whenever you drift back this way, the quiet places will be waiting, just as still, just as gentle, just as kind. Good night.